How has Ted and Rebecca's relationship changed? Which on-set accident made it into the actual show? What might be in store for Richmond in Season 2? We'll be discussing these questions and more in this video. Welcome to Square Eyes, a channel where we recap, review and take a sideways look at your favourite TV shows. This video will be taking a look at the 10th and final episode of the first season of Ted Lasso. It's called The Hope That Kills You. The Apple TV website summarises this episode by saying, Richmond plays a climactic match that will determine the fates of Ted and his club. Which is short but sweet. I'll tell you what happened in a lot more detail. Let's jump straight in. The episode opens with Nate finding someone called Will that has been brought in to do his job. He thinks he's been fired, so he calls Rebecca a shrew when she comes into the changing room. The mood lightens quickly when Ted tells Nate that he hasn't been fired, he's been promoted to the first team coach, and the team are hiding in Ted's office waiting to celebrate with him. After the credits, Roy comes to see Ted in his office and tells him that he needs to pick a new captain as he won't be in the starting 11 for the next game. Ted refuses as he wants Roy to be the captain, but Roy has to explain that the captain needs to be on the pitch. Ted tells Roy that he has to pick the next captain, which Roy fights back against, but Ted won't take no for an answer and throws the captain's armband onto Roy's head. Next, the team are gathered in the press room for a motivational talk ahead of the crucial game against Manchester City. Defeat will mean relegation for Richmond, so it's vital they get something out of the game. To fire up the players, Nate shows them an interview Jamie Tartt has recently had with the media, where he talks about his time at Richmond. Jamie is scathing about his former club, saying he carried them through the games, and he calls Ted an American rodeo clown, before mixing his metaphors when he says he wants to put the final nail in the ashes. The interview is cut short when a chair is thrown at the screen. The chair thrower was Isaac McAdoo, who had clearly seen enough. While everyone was shocked by the sudden violent outburst, Roy Kent was impressed by Isaac's actions. If anything, Nate's plan to fire the team up for the match has worked a little too well, as they all now have plenty of motivation to beat Jamie Tartt and Manchester City. Ted, Beard and Nate gather at Ted's flat to talk tactics ahead of the game. Nate points out that a draw will be enough for Richmond to survive in the Premier League if Crystal Palace win their game by 6 goals, but Ted refuses to listen to the idea of playing for a draw. As the conversation continues, it becomes increasingly clear that Beard and Nate don't believe that they can beat Manchester City, so Ted rushes upstairs to get his little believe sign from his bathroom. The scene ends with Ted calling his two coaches a pair of negative Nellies. Next morning, Ted goes to see Rebecca and tells her he's wondering if the club might have been better with a proper football coach, rather than someone who had never coached football before. Rebecca is quick to lift Ted up and reassure him. She suggests turning his lack of knowledge of football to his advantage by using his lack of experience to cause confusion in the opposition. This suggestion inspires Ted and he's back to his positive self again. He jumps for joy as he leaves Rebecca's office, banging his head on the doorframe, but even that doesn't stop him and he goes back to create a plan for the game. Ted's big idea is to set up the team with a series of trick plays to surprise Manchester City with unusual routines. He takes suggestions from the team, who call out unusual and often silly names for their set-piece routines. Jamie Tartt is at the barber's and meets the Uzi guy from the pilot episode, who shows him a video of Ted talking about him in a press conference. He's very complimentary about Jamie and says how he's been rooting for him. Jamie is completely confused by Ted's comments because he feels like he was rejected by him when his loan was cut short and he was sent back to Man City. He texts Keeley to ask if he can talk. When Jamie gets to Keeley's house, Roy answers the door, which is the last thing that Jamie wanted to happen. The two men sit uncomfortably at the dining table while they wait for Keeley to come downstairs. Jamie has brought coffee over for Keeley and Roy has made her a coffee, so it looks like Keeley's going to have to choose one drink over the other. She chooses a third option and pours Jamie's coffee into the one Roy made and drinks both. Jamie wants Keeley's advice because he thinks Ted's kind words in the media are mind games and he doesn't know how to cope with them. Keeley reassures him that Ted actually does like him, and not everyone's out to get him, though Roy Kent clarifies that he is. Before the crucial game against Man City, Roy passes the captain's armband to Isaac and tells him to never stop breaking TVs. Then it's Ted's pre-match team talk, and he gives a speech about how he believes in hope and how he believes in belief. It might be a bit cheesy to some, but I actually found it quite inspiring, and the players respond to it too and go out believing that they can get something from the game. Richmond make it to half-time with the scores tied at 0-0, mostly thanks to some excellent goalkeeping from Zorro. In the changing room at half-time, Ted overhears some players saying they want to know what the Crystal Palace score is, as a draw against Man City will be enough if Palace get a big win. Ted shuts this talk down quickly and insists that they have to play for the win. Roy is brought off the bench for the second half after he lost his starting place in the last episode. Man City go ahead early in the second half thanks to a penalty, which leaves Richmond with a mountain to climb if they want to stay in the Premier League. Things look even worse when Jamie Tartt runs clear through on goal, but Roy Kent rolls back the years to catch up with his rival and makes an excellent challenge to deny a goal-scoring opportunity. It comes at a cost though, as Roy has injured himself in the process of tackling Tartt and has to be taken off. Roy returns to the changing room and looks completely dejected. A significant injury at this stage of his career is likely to mean he won't play again. Keely comes down to console him, and he tries to send her away, but she comes in anyway. While Kent tells her to stay away from him, she gives him a cuddle and he leans right into it, showing he really needed her comfort in this moment, despite what he was saying. Everyone in the stadium is checking the score in the other game, and they find out that the Crystal Palace game ended in a 6-0 victory, so Richmond now only need a draw to stay in the league, meaning one goal could be enough. Ted calls one of his trick plays, the Lasso Special, which sees the team line up in the style of an American football team, with the goalkeeper kicking the ball far downfield in the style of a quarterback. The play causes chaos and confusion, which allows Richmond to win the ball high up the field and cross to an unmarked Danny Rojas in the box. He applies a lovely finish, and Richmond have the goal that they need to tie the game. There are wild celebrations, but the game isn't finished, and Manchester City have a final attack. Jamie Tartt makes a brilliant run that cuts open the Richmond defence, and he's in a position to shoot. Instead, he makes the extra pass, something Ted coached him on earlier in the season, and it leads to Man City scoring the winning goal. The defeat is a hard blow for everyone to take, and it means Richmond will play the next season in the Championship, the league below the Premier League. After the game, Ted sees Jamie Tartt getting screamed at by his dad because he passed the ball to a teammate instead of going for glory himself. Ted looks horrified by what he sees, but perhaps now better understands why Jamie is the way he is if his dad is so horrible. Ted gathers the Richmond players in the dressing room and tries to lift their spirits, while acknowledging that it's a sad moment and there's nothing that can be done now to reverse what has happened to them. Instead, he tells them to experience the sadness and anger, but then to be like goldfish and forget it quickly. When Jamie is getting on the team bus back to Manchester, he's given a note from Ted to congratulate him on making the extra pass that won his team the game, showing that Ted wasn't playing mind games with his earlier comments and he really does care for Jamie. Then Ted goes to see Rebecca in her office, where he offers his resignation to save her the trouble of firing him. She refuses his offer and tells him that he isn't going anywhere because he needs to start planning for the next season. Ted then lays out his plan to get them promoted back to the Premier League next season, and then the season after to go on and win the league. They toast the idea, but Ted has forgotten about his difficulty with fizzy water and accidentally spits his drink out in Rebecca's face. I really like this final episode. The previous one tied up the story about Rebecca trying to sabotage the club, so now they're pulling in the same direction. The main focus is trying to stay in the Premier League by getting the result against Man City. It's quite hard to give a critical review of the episode because it's just very good. The acting is superb, the writing's spot on, and it all comes together in a satisfying story that caps off the season nicely, but also leaves you eager to watch the second season too. So I don't really have any critical comments about it, I just enjoyed it. Looking at the different storylines we saw in the episode, I think it was nice that we got to see Nate's promotion to coach early on. He started the season as the kit man, but he's become more and more influential in the dressing room. It's only right that his job role reflects that. Ted has nurtured him over the course of the season, and that encouragement has brought out the best in him. And helping people reach their potential is something that Ted focuses on, more than getting results on the pitch. So it's a nice place to start the episode. Another area where we saw growth and progress was in Ted's relationship with Rebecca after her confession in the last episode. Rather than trying to sabotage or undermine Ted, she is now actively trying to help him. Ted went to her with a problem and she guided him to a solution. Given how fine the margins were between survival and relegation for Richmond, it makes you realise that Rebecca is probably the person most responsible for them dropping out of the league. If she'd have been supporting Ted properly all along, then they would most likely have easily been safe. Roy passing on the captaincy to Isaac was another moment where we saw a progression, this time within the team. Now Roy isn't a guaranteed starter in the team, it makes sense to nominate another person to be captain. Isaac is an interesting choice as there are multiple references to his lack of intelligence throughout the season, but he regularly shows heart and passion, which are the qualities that Roy identifies as being important in a leader, and why he chooses Isaac to be captain. Roy going off injured was probably the saddest part of the episode for me, as his body language suggests that he thinks his career is over now, which means he now has to work out what he's going to do with the rest of his life. Footballers have a very regimented life during their playing career, where they're told what to do and at what time. When this is taken away, it can be very disorientating. It's good that he's got Keely there for emotional support for him during this moment. It was a nice little callback to an earlier episode when Jamie Tartt makes the extra pass to set up the winning goal. He'd gone for glory himself earlier in the game in a similar situation and had his shot saved, so it was the right move to pass despite what his father might say. Speaking of which, it's no surprise at all that Jamie has a horrible and overbearing dad, but it does help to explain why he's such a difficult person to like. It'll be interesting to see if this dynamic is explored more in the next season, particularly as Ted is a father figure to him too, and offers a completely different perspective on things. It was noble of Ted to offer his resignation at the end of the episode, but it made sense that Rebecca turned it down. She hadn't really given him a chance to succeed with all of her meddling, so now she's moved past trying to ruin the club. It'll be interesting to see what they can achieve when they work together rather than against each other. My favourite line from this episode came from Ted in the changing room after the game, when he says, "Let's be sad now, let's be sad together, and then we can be gosh darn goldfish." I like how he's not trying to stop people from feeling the emotions that they're going through, but he's helping them through it, reminding them that they have each other for support, and telling them that they can move forward and on to better times. When bad things happen, it can be easy to try and dismiss the negative emotions, but I think it's important to fully experience them, so you can then move on from them, which I think is the point that Ted's trying to make there. The scene where Ted jumps for joy and bangs his head on the door frame wasn't in the script. Jason Sudeikis just banged his head while he was performing the jump. The line, "We're going to win the whole flipping thing," from Ted at the end of the episode is a reference to the film Major League, which also features this line. Ted Lasso's main storyline in Season 1 is very similar to Major League, and this line is a little nod to that. In Major League, a woman takes over a baseball club that she hates and tries to run it into the ground, so you can see the similarity with Rebecca trying to sabotage Richmond. The game against Man City takes place at night in the show, but in reality this would never happen, as the final game of the Premier League season always takes place in the afternoon, so it would be daylight. It also takes place in May, when the weather in London would be fairly mild, so Rebecca looks to be overdressed for the season wearing a hat and scarf. The trick play that Ted uses called the Sandman is a reference to the comic book of the same name. In episode 4 of the comic series, the Sandman battles with a demon and wins thanks to the concept of hope, which is appropriate as battling with hope is a theme of this episode. Isaac misses out the number 8 when he's counted to 12 in the locker room before the game. This is a continuation of the running joke that he's not very bright. Back in the Two Aces episode, he sacrificed a quacking duck pen in the fire, saying it was the only pen that he could spell his name with. There's a joke in this episode where Ted asks the linesman to explain the offside rule to him. This was taken from the original Ted Lasso sketches that inspired the series. At half-time, Ted says, "Ain't nobody here gonna kiss their sister," which causes widespread confusion in the team, as they've not heard this saying before. I'd not either, so I looked it up, and Urban Dictionary says it's something that's a little bit good and a little bit bad. I guess it's because kissing is nice, but when it's your sister it's less appealing. Ted offers to resign at the end of the episode, which does occasionally happen in football management, but is incredibly rare. Because of the way football managers' contracts work, it's much better to be sacked than it is to quit, so the vast majority of managers wait to be fired rather than leave of their own free will. Ted's noble act of offering his resignation could have meant missing out on all the month's salary that he had remaining on his contract. Thankfully his resignation wasn't accepted though, so it wasn't an issue. Looking ahead to Season 2, the big issue is going to be whether Richmond can make it back to the Premier League or not. In real life it's very difficult to bounce straight back into the Premier League, as the Championship is a notoriously tough league to get out of. There are a lot of competitive teams at that level, and the games come thick and fast. Richmond will have the benefit of Premier League quality players, but relegation is often hard to overcome, and there can be a hangover period while the team adjusts. It'll be interesting to see what other storylines crop up in the next season, as most of the major ones have been resolved for Season 1. Crucially, Rebecca and Higgins are no longer trying to cause problems for Ted, so there should, in theory, be more harmony in the club if everyone is working together. Will that mean that the challenges in Season 2 will come from outside, or will something happen to unsettle a balance within the team? It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Ted's personal life is still in a state of flux too. As you know, he's struggling to get over his divorce and to build a new life in England. There's also the issue of his anxiety attacks that he's suffered that may come back, as that's not something that typically goes away overnight. One of the themes of this season has been about Ted being a fish out of water and struggling to adjust to the transition from America to the UK. Now that he's been in England for a while, that will be less of an issue, so there will need to be new avenues to explore with his character, which should be interesting. We've also got Roy and Keely's relationship that seems to be going strong at the moment, but Roy is a volatile character and Keely isn't someone willing to put up with poor treatment, so I'm interested to see what happens with them. It could also be that the writers look to the other cast members for storylines too. There are lots of players that we've barely got to know yet, so someone like Danny Rojas, Isaac McAdoo or Sam Obasanye could become a more central character next season. There are a lot of potential directions that the next season could go in, and I'm excited to see what the writers choose to do with it. Thank you for watching my recap and review of the final episode of Season 1 of Ted Lasso. I'll be posting my video for the opening episode of Season 2 in the next few days. Please make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications to make sure you don't miss it. Goodbye.